Graham EK and Ben Gregg have not looked like themselves in the early part of the season, but once those two round into form, look out.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Wednesday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, place your first $5 bet, and you will get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win. Just visit FanDuel.com today to get started. Well, Chet Holmgren and Andrew Nembhard are both on the shelf right now as Zags in the NBA. Domantas Sabonis is making history. Anton Watson made his G League debut. We're going to talk about all of that. But first, we start the show talking about the two players for Gonzaga who haven't really been off to the best starts this season. Of course, Gonzaga's off to a 2-0 start, 2 wins over Big 12 teams, a 38-point mashing of Baylor last Monday, as well as a too close for comfort, but still win over Arizona State on Sunday. And while it's been easy to focus on the positives, the great play early in the season for Ryan Nembhard, the seamless fitting in that we've seen from the two new transfers, Caleb Battle and Michael Ajayi, a dominant performance off the bench from Braden Huff, and strong performances from Dusty Stromer, there have been a couple of players who haven't quite looked like themselves, and there's been a lot of consternation. Seen it on social media, seen it in the excellent Locked On Zags Discord channel. Again, join if you haven't yet. Free to join, link in the show notes on both audio and video platforms. Come hang out. We're talking Zags all the time over there, but a lot of the conversation lately has been about Graham EK and Ben Gregg, Gonzaga's starting center and starting power forward, the two parts of the front court for Mark Few's team, who just haven't looked exactly like themselves. We're going to talk a little bit about what we've seen from those two players and what it might mean for the Zags going forward. We'll start with EK, and I'll just give you a little look at his line. And I think it's important to talk about this, and this is one of the parts of the conversation in the Discord, was that the eye test for Graham EK is more significant in terms of why there's concern than the actual performance on the floor. And I think eye test and actual stats do not always line up. And I think a lot of the times I try to inform using the stats because sometimes people think, well, he had a really bad game. And you look at the numbers and it's like, I actually didn't have that bad of a game. And it doesn't mean that the eye test is not important, obviously, but there's got to be kind of a yin and yang with those. So particularly against Baylor, Graham EK finished that game with 15 points and 8 rebounds. That's not terribly far off from his averages last year. He averaged about 17 points and about a little under 8 rebounds per game last year. That's pretty much what he averaged. He also had 3 assists, a steal, and 2 turnovers, and that was in 21 minutes of action. He wasn't super effective. He was 6 of 11 on 2-pointers, so a little over 50%. Missed his 1 3-point attempt. He was 3 of 6 from the free throw line. That was an aberration for him. But then against Arizona State, definitely a more uncharacteristic EK performance, not just from the eye test, but on the actual floor statistically as well. 9 points, 4 rebounds, and an assist. He had 3 turnovers in that one. He only played 14 minutes, was basically benched for the majority of the second half with foul trouble. He had 3 fouls and did not come back into the game. And we know Mark Few is fairly stingy about playing guys in foul trouble, but last year, I don't think that Graham EK sits for the entire rest of the second half when he only has 3 fouls in a close game. That wouldn't have happened last year. But because of the performance of Braden Huff, the Zags were able to do that. Graham finished that game 4 of 6 from the field, so 9 points is uncharacteristic for Graham, but he was 4 of 6 from the field, 1 of 2 from the free throw line. But the main thing with Graham is that he just looks a little rusty, a little bit slower. I don't know if he's still rounding into game shape, if he was maybe dealing with injuries. We haven't heard anything, at least as of this recording. We have not heard anything about an injury for Graham. Certainly if he was injured to the point where obviously he wouldn't be playing if there was a significant injury. And so I don't think it's anything serious, but it's possible that maybe he was dealing with something in the offseason and he's just not quite in game shape yet. We're speculating at this point. We don't know anything concrete, but I think it's reasonable for folks who watched these 2 games to be like, well, he doesn't quite look like he has that same juice that he had last year. He's not moving quite as well. And maybe maybe that'll come back. And I think that's a big part of this, is that nothing I've seen from Graham feels like it's going to be a long-term issue. It doesn't, I mean, he's not suddenly going to just not be as explosive of an athlete unless there's something more significant going on, which if there was, he wouldn't be playing. The staff wouldn't be putting him out there, starting him and trying to get, significant minutes from him if they thought he couldn't contribute in that way. So yes, I concur with the idea that he hasn't quite looked like himself, but what an incredible luxury to be able to play Braden Huff. Graham's still a better defensive player than Braden, but it doesn't really matter if he's going to get himself into foul trouble. If he's committing fouls and Braden's giving up buckets, it's not a significant difference. And right now, Braden is the more impactful offensive player. Graham hasn't been that bad offensively. He just hasn't quite been himself, and Braden's been outstanding. He's barely missed any shots this season. He's been incredible in those first two games. He was a prolific scorer around the rim last year, so it's not like this is unprecedented or unable to sustain. I think he's like 90% around the rim. He's not going to stay that good, but he did not perform like this against high quality opponents last year. While I'm not sure Arizona State is going to be a great team this year, they were 25th in adjusted defensive efficiency coming into that game. By all accounts, that is the type of team that Braden Huff did not play well against last year, and he brought it on Sunday. And I think that's a massive, massive story for Gonzaga. And while a lot of people want to focus on the struggles of Graham Ike, I don't think it's a long-term issue for Graham. And when he's back to being the player he was at the end of last year, to have him and Braden is a tremendous luxury for this team. Regarding Ben Gregg, a little bit more, for lack of a better word, concern with Gregg. He had 9 points and 3 boards in that game against Baylor. He also had an assist and a steal and 2 fouls in 16 minutes. 3 of 3 on 2-pointers, 0 of 1 from 3, 3 of 5 from the free throw line, but really didn't do much against Arizona State. Just 2 points for him, just 3 rebounds and an assist. He had 1 turnover. It was a bad pass to Graham, trying to make that high-low entry pass and just sailed it out of bounds. He only played 11 minutes in that game, and he was not benched because of foul trouble. He did not pick up any fouls in that game against Arizona State. He just got benched in the second half, replaced with Michael Ajayi, and they just ran with Michael Ajayi for the rest of the game. On the season, Ben Gregg has not missed a 2-point attempt, 4 of 4, but he is 0 of 4 from the 3-point line. So 50% on the season from the field, but all of them have been 2-point makes, has not made a 3 yet. It's not that Ben has made a lot of mistakes. I mean, he's got 1 turnover and 2 fouls committed in 2 games. He just hasn't made much of an impact. He hasn't been getting a ton of rebounds. He hasn't been hitting his 3-point shots. He just has kind of been sort of invisible when he's been on the floor. But I think the main thing about the power forward position for Gonzaga is not that Ben Gregg has looked terrible or anything like that. He's been fine. He just hasn't been as good as he was at times last year. But it's noticeable in part because of how impactful and just really good Michael Ajayi has looked. And I think that's more of the storyline. Graham's going to round into form, and him and Braden are going to form a dynamic front court duo. Is it possible that Braden ends up playing closer to even minutes with Graham this year? Yeah, I think that's possible, and I think it's likely. Or in certain matchups, it'll end up happening because of foul trouble and things like that. But I don't think there's going to be a huge shift or changing of the guard in the center position for Gonzaga. But at power forward, I think you could argue there already has been 2 games. In 2 games for Gonzaga, Michael Ajayi has played 51 minutes. Ben Gregg has played 27. Whether Gonzaga makes a starting lineup change or not, I don't know. It's possible Gonzaga continues to start Ben Gregg because they like him in that starting lineup. They like what he brings. They like having Michael come off the bench. I mean, it's possible it's just as simple as not messing with something that has worked up to this point. But frankly, Michael Ajayi is and has been a better player than Ben Gregg. He is a better rebounder. He is a better 3-point shooter. He is a better offensive player. Defensively, I think it's close. I think Ben's probably a better low post defender because he's been asked to do that more. I think Michael's a better one-on-one in space defender because he's been asked to do that more himself. But overall, it's hard to argue that Michael hasn't been the more impactful player for this team and is the more skilled basketball player than Ben. That's just the reality of the situation. Again, it shouldn't be a shocker. Michael Ajayi led the conference in points last year. He's 17.7 points per game at Pepperdine, averaged about 10 rebounds. He was really good in the WCC last year. you switch them and you put Ben on Pepperdine. I don't think he averages 18 and 10. That's not to say Ben is bad or wouldn't be very good at Pepperdine, but it's just, I think Ajayi is a more impactful player. And while I don't know if there'll be a starting lineup change, because I think there's factors there that aren't as simple as you start the 5 best players and you have the players who aren't as good come off the bench. It's not that simple. It's never necessarily been that simple. Pay attention to closing lineups. Pretty clear that Ben Gregg is not in the closing lineup for Gonzaga. Michael Ajayi is. I expect that to continue to be the case. Whether that means there will be a change in the starting lineup or not remains to be seen. But Michael Ajayi is the player more in favor with the staff right now. And until Ben rebounds, until Ben comes back and looks more like himself, or if we start to see a slip from Ajayi, I expect that that's going to continue to be the case. And even if Ben does round into form, he's not going to continue to miss all of his three-point attempts. He's a 37% three-point shooter. I think we're going to see him start to get on a little bit of a hot streak from deep. And, maybe he's dealing with some early season rust too. It happens. It's not that surprising. Gonzaga never, ever opens the season with 2 good teams, and they did this year. So I think it's fair for guys who maybe we're not used to seeing them struggle this way, struggle against good teams. It doesn't mean that there's going to be continued struggles for them, but at this point, Michael is a much more impactful player than Ben, and I think there's a real possibility that continues. But that's not bad news for Gonzaga. The fact that this team can withstand their 2 starting front court players not having particularly good games and still be 2-0, that may not have happened last year. Somebody said in the Discord channel that this game kind of reminded them of the San Diego State game last year. Yeah, the Arizona State game was kind of similar to that, and Gonzaga didn't win that game. And they didn't win that game in part because the depth wasn't there. And in this game, they were able to rely on Michael Ajayi to hit some big shots and grab some key rebounds. They were able to rely on Caleb Battle to go crazy and score 19 points in the second half. Like, they got performances that they didn't have on this roster last year. And so I'm not overly focused on Graham and Ben not having a great start to the season, because I think it'll just get better. I don't think these 2 guys are just, it's not the Space Jam situation where they lost their talent. They're going to be fine. They're going to find it as the year goes on. But the fact that Gonzaga can withstand that and still win good games is a hugely promising sign for this team going forward this season. All right, folks, we're going to move on. We're going to talk about Zags in the NBA. I haven't done a season update on these players yet, so we're going to talk about that. Unfortunately, it opens with 2 players who are dealing with some significant injuries. We're also going to talk about what looks like the start of a breakout season for Jalen Suggs and a strong performance from Julian Strawther off Denver's bench. All that coming up in just a second. But first, let's talk about Game Time, because going to live events is the absolute best. Not just sporting events, whether it's concerts, whether it's theater shows, whether it's comedy, all of that is fantastic. And now, of course, we are starting to get basketball back in the mix, and I'm so looking forward to making new memories this college sports season. And great news, this season, when you're getting tickets, Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that helps make getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so that you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of different tickets. And right now, tickets for Gonzaga versus Kentucky Climate Pledge Arena, they remain on sale. 2 tickets in the upper deck are now $62 a pop. So folks, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you will get $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're closing out the show for the next 2 segments, talking about the Zags in the NBA. We're going to talk about some of the younger guys who are in the league to start it off, and then we're going to close out the show, talk about some of the veteran Zags, and talked about the players in the G League as well. We start with some unfortunate news. Chet Holmgren, who is off to an incredible start this season with the Oklahoma City Thunder, has suffered a right iliac wing fracture, which is effectively a fracture to his pelvic bone, and he is going to be reevaluated in 8 to 10 weeks. And the unfortunate part of that update, it is not a return to play in 8 to 10 weeks. It is a reevaluation, which means that he will be out longer than that, potentially significantly longer than that. This is a devastating blow, of course, for the Thunder. I know many Gonzaga fans are not exactly fans of the Oklahoma City Thunder because of the Seattle Supersonics and being fans of that team. I understand that. I'm a Blazers fan, so I'm also not a fan of the Thunder, but I am a big fan of Chet Holmgren. And it is really devastating. It's another kind of fluky injury, similar to the Liz Frank injury that kept him out for his entire rookie season. As a reminder, after that injury, he returned for his rookie season last year, was one of 7 players to play all 82 games. So I know that there's going to be a narrative push of like, oh, look, he's hurt again, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, this is his third year as a professional, and he's had now 2 significant injuries, but he did play an entire season prior to this. So really unfortunate that this happened for Chet. Having a great year, like I said, 16.5 points, just under 9 rebounds per game, 2.6 blocks, was shooting about 38% from 3. Tough blow for the Thunder, who are now basically missing all of their front court players, are hurt. Hopefully we'll get a positive update for Chet in a couple of months when they do that reevaluation. Andrew Nembhard, former teammate of Chet Holmgren's, also out with an injury. He's going to be out for a couple of weeks, is the latest update from Rick Carlisle, the coach of the Pacers. Sounds like it's a knee injury for him. Going to be about 2 weeks is what they're saying, but hopefully not any longer than that. So he should be back Thanksgiving-ish, maybe early December at the latest for him. Having a solid season, but not as impactful as he's been in the past. Some additions for Indiana in the backcourt, Ben Mathurin being healthy, has just there's a lot of mouths to feed in Indiana, and he hasn't quite gotten that production, but he's averaging just under 5 assists per game, 7 points in 7 games so far in the year, all starts too. So he's in the starting lineup, playing a decent role. Hopefully he's back in just a couple of weeks. Now done with the injury stuff, talking about the players who are off to really good starts. Jalen Suggs has been fantastic. He looks like a potential all-star in the very crowded Eastern Conference where you're competing against Jaylen Brown and Tyrese Halliburton and Tyrese Maxey for Philadelphia and many other players who I'm not thinking of off the top of my head, but Suggs has been exceptional. 11 games so far with Orlando, averaging 15 points, 5 boards, 4 assists, 1.5 steals, and a block per game. Every single one of those categories is a career high for Jalen, except for assists. His career high was as a rookie 4.4 per game. This year he's at 4.2. So really close to his career high in assists. Not shooting great from 3, 32.5%. Last year he was about 40%. So it's a bit of a drop. But again, it's also only 11 games. So hopefully he can find that 3-point shot that was a valuable weapon for him last year. That hasn't quite been there for him this year, but he's top 10 in the NBA in defensive rating. He's top 10 in the NBA in defensive win shares. So once again, continues to be one of the most impactful defensive players in the league. He was an all-defender, all-NBA defensive player last year. I suspect, assuming he can stay healthy, he will be in that conversation this year as well. And as a note, I'm recording this before Orlando's Tuesday game, so his stats are a little different if you were to look at him right now based on how that game goes tonight. Want to talk Corey Kispert as well. He's off to a little bit of a slow start for Washington. He's not as effective as he normally is. Coming off the bench, which he started, I think, 20 games last year. He started 45 games the year previously. So he's never had a season where he didn't start at least 20 games. So we'll be curious to see if he ends up entering the starting lineup at some point this season for the Wizards. But it's worth pointing out, in the 9 games he has played, while he's come off the bench in all of them, he is averaging 29.8 minutes per game, which is a career high. So he's not in the starting lineup, but he's playing more minutes than he ever has played before, but he's also averaging just under 10 points per game, about 3 boards and 1.5 assists. He's only shooting 25% from 3. That's going to come up. The 9-game sample size, it's going to come up. He's going to look better from beyond the arc. I expect the numbers will tick up. He's going to continue to be an impactful player. Signed an extension this offseason with Washington, so we'll see if seems like they're viewing him as a part of the future for that program. Hopefully they can start rebuilding, because it has been a long road of dissatisfaction for DC and their fans, and hopefully Corey can be part of the next great Washington team. And then last here, before we move on to talk about some of the veteran Gonzaga players in the NBA, we'll talk Julian Strawther here. Key piece for Denver off the bench. He had a monster summer league and a monster preseason, and kind of looked like he was primed for a sophomore breakout year in his second NBA season. And he's been good. Hasn't quite broke out yet, but it's only 9 games or 10 games for him. And Denver really hasn't looked all that great. They've been struggling. They've had some injury issues. Jamal Murray's out right now. On the season, in 10 games, Strawther's averaging 9.3 points, 2 boards, 1.5 assists, shooting 36% from 3 on about 3.5 attempts per game. But I read a good article about he's been part of the closing lineup for Denver lately, and lately as in just the last 2 games. The closing lineup for Denver is Nikola Jokic, Michael Porter Jr., Peyton Watson, Christian Brown, and Julian Strawther. That lineup in 18 minutes in the last 2 games has a plus 41.7 net rating. There's a good quote from Denver coach Michael Malone saying, "I never expected that this would be my closing lineup for this team, but with Jamal Murray out, with some other players injured, this has been who they've turned to and who they've relied on." And for Strother to be, I said it in the first segment about Michael Ajayi, starting doesn't matter as much as finishing. If you're relied on by your team to close out games, that is a clear sign that your team views you as one of the most important players on the roster. Denver is viewing Julian Strother in that role, and they have been really productive with him on the floor at the end of games. That is a awesome sign for him. Incredibly happy for Julian to see him having that success in his second NBA season. Well, folks, Domantas Sabonis did something that has literally never, ever happened in the history of the NBA, and it came with so little fanfare. We're going to talk about that, plus the G League debut for Anton Watson, coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, get ready to tackle the college hoops action this season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if that first bet wins. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. And I'm feeling great about Gonzaga's chances of winning the battle for Atlantis. The odds are up on FanDuel right now, plus 135 to take home that championship. If you like those odds, if you like any of the other upcoming game odds for UMass Lowell, San Diego State, Long Beach State, any other games as they come up, just visit FanDuel.com today. As a reminder, you will get started with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet is a win. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, closing out the show, continuing our conversation about how our Zags have looked in the NBA in the early part of the 2024-25 season. We're starting here with Domantas Sabonis. He has the first ever perfect triple-double. This has never been done in the history of the NBA, recording a triple-double where you do not miss a single field goal, you do not miss a single free throw, and you do not commit a single turnover. In the history of basketball, Russell Westbrook averaged a triple-double. Way back, Oscar Robertson averaged a triple-double. Nikola Jokic has however many triple-doubles that he has in his career. In the history of all of those triple-doubles, which have become a lot more common in the recent era, nobody has ever done it where they also didn't miss a single shot or a free throw and did not turn the basketball over. But on November 6th, Domantas Sabonis for Sacramento against the Toronto Raptors, he had 17 points, 11 rebounds, 13 assists, was 6 of 6 from the field, 5 of 5 from the free throw line, and did not turn it over. What an incredible accomplishment. And how much does this speak to the fact that Sabonis doesn't really get the attention that he should? I get it. He plays in Sacramento. He previously played in Indiana. He just hasn't been in big market areas. He hasn't kind of gotten the press that you'd expect. He's a relatively quiet guy. He doesn't command attention in that way, but that's an incredible stat line. And his season line is incredible as well. It always is. He's averaging 20.7 points. That's a career high for him. 12.8 rebounds, 6.6 assists. He's shooting 69% on two-pointers, which is very much a career high. 37.5% from three. His field goal percentage of 66.8 is a career high. He's just been otherworldly good through Sacramento's first 10 games. A fantastic player who doesn't get the credit nationally that he deserves. Yes, the defense is not great, but what we've seen from him offensively is some of the best stuff we've ever seen from a player. And yeah, Nikola Jokic being another Euro big, putting up routine triple doubles is probably hurting Sabonis and his legacy, but still some incredible stuff from him. And I wanted to shout out that triple double because many of you are probably hearing about it for the first time, and that is an unfortunate reality of how little fanfare he's getting. 3 more players to talk about who are active so far this season. Rui Hachimura off to a little bit of a slow start. He's shooting it super well from beyond the arc, 47% from 3, averaging 12 points and 6 boards, playing a career high 34 minutes per game because of some injuries that the Lakers have dealt with, but struggling on 2-point shots, just kind of hasn't quite looked like himself yet this year. But again, we're early in the season, and the fact that he's shooting so well from 3 is potentially a promising sign of things to come for Rui this year. Brandon Clark and Zach Collins are the last 2 guys, and they're both in smaller roles than we've seen from them historically. Clark likely because he's coming off of a serious injury last year, and of course because Memphis drafted Zach Edey, and with Zach Edey and Jaren Jackson Jr. in the front court, it limits Clark to only playing about 15 minutes per game. Through Memphis's first 11 games, he's averaging 5.5 points and 3 boards. We'll see if he gets more playing time as the year goes on, potentially as he gets more comfortable coming off that injury, and or if there's any injuries to the rest of the Memphis players. Collins in 11 games has played just about 14 minutes per game, similar numbers, about 5.5 points, 3 boards per game. He's still healthy, but he's just not a big part of San Antonio's team right now. Not sure he's a big part of their future. He's only 27, but that team is in rebuilding mode, and I think there's a chance that he kind of doesn't end up being a big part of their team this season. We'll see if that leads to a trade or any situation where he ends up finding himself somewhere else. But for right now, just not getting a ton of playing time for Collins. Last but not least, Kelly Olynyk. He has yet to debut this season for Toronto. It's reportedly will be back sometime in late November, dealing with a back injury, so he has not played yet this season. Always exciting to see Kelly Olynyk get his opportunity, so hoping to see him back on the floor soon for his hometown Toronto team. Now I want to close out the show talking about the G League players for Gonzaga. 5 players have made their season debut in the G League from Gonzaga. Anton Watson for the Maine Celtics, Malachi Smith for Memphis, Drew Timme for the Stockton Kings, David Stockton for the Valley Suns, and Jeremy Jones for the Rio Grande Vipers. Anton Watson has played 2 games for Maine, 7 points, 4 boards in his first game, 12 points, 9 boards, 5 assists, and 2 steals. That is a quintessential Anton Watson line right there. 31 minutes, 5 of 9 from the field. Again, 12, 9, 5, and 2. If he keeps putting up production like that, he will get his opportunity with Boston very soon. As a reminder, he's on a 2-way contract. So part of the deal with a 2-way contract is you get guaranteed opportunities to be on the NBA bench. Doesn't necessarily mean you'll get in the game, but you will be an active part of the roster for Boston at some point this season. Again, he keeps producing like that. It might be sooner rather than later. Malachi Smith has played very well in his first 2 games with the Memphis Hustle, a big part of the team, 36 minutes in his first game, 37 in his second game. Game 1, 12 points, 7 assists, 5 boards. Game 2, a double-double for Malachi, 15 points, 10 rebounds, and 6 assists. Nice to see him playing well. Drew Timme's only played 1 game. I should say the Stockton Kings have only played 1 game. In that game, Drew came off the bench. And just 18 minutes, he had 15 points, 8 boards, and 3 assists on 5 of 7 shooting. Another pretty quintessential line there, 15 and 8 with a trio of assists. Very efficient as well, 5 of 7 from the field. David Stockton has played 3 games with the Valley Suns. He was pretty awful in his first game of the season, came off the bench, 4 points, 3 boards, 3 assists, 0 of 6 from the field, but he's been much better in the other 2 games with Valley. 13 points, 7 assists, and 3 steals in 25 minutes in game 2. 13 points, 5 assists, 2 boards on 4 of 8 shooting in 25 minutes in game 3. He was 3 of 4 from beyond the arc. As a reminder, for those of you who maybe missed this, David Stockton is 3rd all-time in assists in G League basketball history. If he continues to play at the level he's been playing at, there's a real possibility he could move into the all-time leader in assists in the G League history. It'd be very fun if John Stockton was the NBA's all-time assist leader and David Stockton was the G League's all-time assist leader. I've been hoping Courtney Vandersloot would overtake Sue Bird for the WNBA's all-time assist leader. Based on how her season went this last year, I'm a little less confident that that's going to happen for Courtney, but hey, you never know. If she bounces back next year, if she returns and bounces back next year, maybe she could get there. But even if David does it for the G League, that would be just a really fun Zag-adjacent story. Last but not least, Jeremy Jones, one of my favorite players, friend of the podcast, one of the first player guests I ever had. Jeremy, who played at Gonzaga in a reserve role for a couple of years, has been in Japan playing professionally for the last 4 or 5 years, I think. He's now back in the States playing with the Rio Grande Vipers in the G League in his first game. He did not score, but he played 18 minutes and had 7 rebounds. It's kind of what Jeremy Jones did at Gonzaga as well. Wasn't a big scorer, wasn't a big shot taker, wasn't asked to be an offensive focal point, but was a tenacious rebounder, was a good defensive player. And I suspect he'll fill a similar role for Rio Grande this season. Again, like I said with Suggs, I'm recording this before Rio Grande's second game of the season. So Jeremy's, I won't have the full scope of his season up to this point, but excited to see him continue to hopefully play well in the G League this season. Going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much to those of you who have made the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. I'll be back on Thursday talking about the conference, how we've been looking so far, Gonzaga's chances against St. Mary's, who might step up and finish in third place as Wazoo going to compete with San Francisco and Santa Clara. Pacific looks pretty good. We're going to talk about that. All sorts of fun stuff coming your way on Thursday's show. Then Friday, we'll get you ready for Gonzaga's game against UMass Lowell that evening. Thanks again, folks, for listening. And until next time, as always, go Zags.